Prior to GeneXus 15, we needed to specify again and generate and compile the application every time that we wanted to try a change in design. GeneXus 15 includes a live editing tool that enables design changes and some behavior changes, in addition to the possibility of viewing such changes instantly on the device's app, or on the web app browser without the need to compile anything, and without the need to save those changes either. The two steps necessary to use live editing are, in the first place, to change the combo from the release value to the live editing value, and then execute the application, making sure it's compiled. Live editing does not function with the KBN. This will leave the live editing server listening to the changes we make to the app in order to replicate them on the metadata to which the mobile device will have access, or the emulator, which is then used to draw the screen on the device and define its behavior. It's best to demonstrate this with a small demo. Here's a KB that is rather empty and has only two transactions, country and speaker, with a menu for smart devices, event day, which invokes both work with for smart devices. And here we're looking at it in a running emulator. For example, we see the list of countries, and here the list of speakers. Okay, now let's say we want to try some changes in the design of this work with element of this list. For example, we may want to add the speaker's last name, add other data, modify how we are viewing the information, maybe we want to enlarge the image to take up more space on the screen, change the color, and so on. So to do all this, up to version evolution 3, what we had to do was open the corresponding work with element, for example, speakers, then open the screen, and make the corresponding changes to the layout and generate the entire application again. Then compile everything again so that we can open the application again in the emulator. In our case, if we had a device connected to the computer, it would logically be in the same device where it would open. And then and only then could we test the changes and maybe realize that it wasn't what we wanted and we would have to do the layout change again, compile everything again, wait for all that compilation time, and only then see the result once again. Well, all of that is a lot easier with live editing because we're not going to need those build cycles anymore. To enable live editing, we select this combo and change the value from release to live editing. But it's not enough to do just this. Now what we're going to have to do is compile the application we want to test again with this live editing feature. If we had the menu for smart devices event day as startup object, pressing F5 would be enough to make sure that it would be compiled again. Since it hasn't been set as startup object, we right-click and select Run. And there we make sure that the application is compiled. Let's see what's going on. A new window has already been enabled here that wasn't there, live editing. We see that what was updated was shown in the window, and what we see here in the live editing window is a list of all the devices we're prototyping with. In this case, it's only one. And that will be the devices the IDE will be connected to, ready to work with live editing. For live editing, we use a bidirectional channel between the device executing the app and the IDE, which functions as a server. In the example, the IDE is listening. Here, in the computer called Help Desk. And the device that executes the application is called like this, which is the emulator. We can see the device name, the theme used, the language, and the operating system. On the other hand, we see that we have this option here, Live Inspector, that opened in this window here. What are we looking at? I'm going to open it a little more, just to be clear. Well, on this screen, we're not seeing anything, or we are seeing very little, because it really corresponds to the menu for smart devices, which, as we know, is a type of object that is not inspectable by live editing. But let's see what happens if I'm in the emulator, which is being listened to, then, by live editing. For example, we enter the list of countries. we see that the information was automatically refreshed on this screen. And now, yes, it allows me to go through the different controls that are present in the layout. And not only that, it's going to give us information that we're going to see now, but I can also, if I click and hold with the mouse and move the mouse, see that I can move in some way, showing the different layers of the application. The layout then remains with the depth it has, which controls are below which controls. Here we see the application bar, for example. And here we have Table 1, which contains the country flag, country name. Then we see which controls are involved. We can return to the flat position with a reset, or move it up or down, whatever we want. We can even zoom in if we don't get a good look at the information at that size, and so on. I'm going to do a reset, and for example, if I click on the country, Brazil, we see the object to which that control belongs, the name of the control, its class, and in this case, it has a label class, and it tells me what the name of that class is, the size and position on the screen. I switch to another one that's the same type, and it shows me the same thing. If I switch to the image, we see that country flag appears. If I click on the application bar, it tells me that the object is application bar, the name of the control, the class, and so on. And not only that, by clicking there, I can edit the properties of those classes. Or, let's see how directly in the properties window it's already showing me the control's information, so that I can modify it directly here, or even properties of its class. Let's see what happens if we change the country name properties class. Let's change it from attribute title to attribute title red, for example. We see that the color automatically changed, because in the class we established that the forecolor corresponded to this color here. If we go to the device, we see that it changed here too, and this was done automatically without us having to do anything but change the control class. And this was not saved. Therefore, if we change our mind, it's enough for us to close the object without saving it. Some things we can do directly from here, and for others, we will have to go to the layout. For example, if we want to add a column between the image of the country and the name to generate space in the middle. To do that, we come to the list, the layout, and we position ourselves on the table, which contains these two elements, which has the column style property, which indicates that we have two columns, one that takes 44 dips, and the other that takes the remaining 100%. We can add a new column, insert column after, between the first and the second, and what we have to do is set the size of each of the columns. So if we leave it at that, and go to the live inspector, we see how the size was automatically adjusted. We see that the middle column is appearing although it has nothing, so we don't see anything there, but we see how the size was adjusted. In the emulator, we will see exactly the same adjustment. So now we can experiment with the size, for example. We can say that we want the second column to take a fixed size of 10 dips. And we can see how it adjusted itself again. And for example, we want the former to take a relative size of 30% now, so that the latter will have to occupy 70%, the remaining 70%. And so we see then how the information is displayed, live, and without the need for any compilation. What I can see live and what things I can't depend on whether I am working with interface elements or with elements already loaded. For example, here we have an attribute, but these values here were already loaded in the layout when we started running the application. Or right here, if I choose Canada, we're going to see the detail of Canada. This information is obviously going to be searched in the database, but from the moment it's loaded, I can work with this information. Now, what would happen if I added here some attribute that wasn't initially in the information being uploaded? If I made an insert out of an attribute, what's going to happen is that this element is going to be empty. Nothing is going to be seen. Because for the load of this attribute to take effect, well, it depends actually. It can be the refresh event or the load event. It will depend on whether we're working on the flat side or whether, for example, we are working with the speakers, in this case from Canada, which will be several. In this case, it'll be the load event, but you're going to have to run those events on the server to get that information. But the code for those events is not inspectable by live editing. Here, when information about Canada is being displayed, it's because we're running the REST data providers, which were compiled with the last run operation. If we need to add an attribute to the information shown here, those data providers, which are going to look for the information in the database, will have to be compiled again. So, we're going to have to execute another run operation. Live editing can only run existing data providers, but logically, it can't modify them. We hadn't mentioned that if, for example, we press F5 on the home web object, we will see the live editing window as shown on the right when the browser is opened due to the run process. The green dot shows which device is heard at the time. We can see that here, the browser started to be listened to, and the device, the emulator, was no longer listened. Lastly, what type of changes are viewed live on the device and on the live inspector screen? In smart device applications, changes to layouts, table rows and columns, in design properties of controls, properties of the control theme classes, and changes to events executed on the client. We don't mention them, but also, if we make changes in those types of events, for example, in a tap associated with a control, and so on. That change will also be automatically reflected when we're running the application on the device and before we even save those changes, and changes to text relative to translation. As we said in the demo, changes such as those in the events on the server in smart devices, start, refresh, or load, and attributes added as fields in a layout cannot be seen live with live editing. Those changes still require the regular build cycle. For the web, there's also the possibility of using this functionality, but it's much more restricted than in smart devices. And the only changes you can see without recompiling are changes to the class properties of the themes. To introduce